Hi everyone, in this video I want to share with you the top 5 facts and concepts that I learned from reading the book Creativity Inc. This book is by the co-founder and president of Pixar, and he was there throughout the entirety of Pixar's existence. So every big movie that you can think of, like Toy Story, Toy Story 2, Toy Story 3, The Incredibles, Cars, Up, Ratatouille, and so on, Monsters University, all of these films, he has played a part in them and overseen the process. So I want to share with you some interesting advice, interesting insights to maybe convince you to read this book. Now, this man is just so amazing because if you guys don't know, Steve Jobs played quite a decent part in Pixar being what it is. This was after he got kicked out of Apple. And more so than anything, I think this book is the #1 book to read if you are interested in animation or you're interested in creating long animated films or short animated pictures, and you're an artist and you like to write stories and you like to come up with stories, or you're just a writer and you like, inventing fictional pieces of art. And the reason is because he talks about the entire creative process and all of these things. So without further ado, let's get into number 5. We'll count down from 5 to 1. So number 5. First, you have to make sure that your experiences do not affect your decision making too much. He calls this anecdotal experience, and one example he uses is if you get to work on time, but the car behind you had broken down and clogged up the traffic and prevented everyone else from getting to work, and you just barely were lucky enough to escape that, but you didn't realize it. So you go to work and you think, wow, I got here pretty early. I'm going to sleep in a little later the next day. Versus all the people behind that car that broke down behind you, they had the exact opposite decision. I have to wake up earlier in case something like this happens again. So the point of that is how anecdotal experience can skew your understanding of things and your opinions and perceptions of things. And, just by pure chance, you drew a completely opposite opinion and decision based off that. Number 4, and this one is important as well, I think more so important. This has to do with management. When you get promoted or you rise to a senior position, you cannot think that everything stays the same. Like it or not, and here's why it's important. Like it or not, when you rise to a senior level, employees will treat you different, and by the nature of where you are, there's a possibility that they will hide things from you, that they will be nicer to you, that they won't say things to you because you have a higher role. And this is very important because many people, they stay the same. They assume that everyone will treat them the same and no one is hiding anything from them, and they're just, expressing how they were back when, they used to be a part of the team and on a lower tier in the organization. That's not always the case, and it's important to realize this and figure out ways where you can still, learn from your employees or let them know that it's okay to share specific information with you. The third top thing that I learned from reading Creativity Inc. is that the creation process is very, very messy. Now, Pixar has such a flawless record. If you talk to any adult, most of them will say that Pixar is amazing. Now, Rotten Tomatoes, which is a film rating website that's very well known, they have some of these Pixar films like Toy Story, Toy Story 1, Toy Story 2, Toy Story 3. They have these films rated at like 90 9%. Do you realize how hard that is? Like, every mainstream film that's released every year in theaters, the ones that everyone knows, most of those films get like 30% or 40% ratings. Some of them get 20% ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. And here we have Toy Story getting 99%, getting one of the highest ratings in the history of Rotten Tomatoes. So it just goes to show you the flawlessness of what they do. However, after reading this book and hearing all the stories, I've realized that, behind the scenes, it's a chaotic mess. They are literally coming up with this one idea and then scrapping it and then trying something new and keeping like 1% of the previous story. And, they're scrapping parts of it because it's too much, it's too complicated, or it's too much of a side story, or it's too related to a previous film that they didn't even know of, and they don't want to seem like they're copying them. And I am just absolutely amazed, because it goes to show you that the brainstorming and creative process is incredible. And, the finished product, everyone just looks at and says, wow, that's so amazing. But the way that they think and the way that they function, they know that they may mess up. They try their best, and they're willing to scrap an entire project if it's not up to par. And it's a lot messier, and it's not like they just come up with the golden idea from the get-go. And there's so many examples. The biggest one is probably Up. Up is a classic film, and the initial idea for it was completely different from what it is. The initial idea was a floating castle where there was two princes who were going to inherit the throne that hated each other and were complete opposites. Then they fell to earth, and they were raised by a weird bird to love each other. And it was a completely different story, basically. And they scrapped the whole thing except for like two things: the bird and the house and the name of the film. So you can kind of see how these things are, manifesting. Number two, the second top thing that I learned from reading Creativity Inc. is that the entire process of their journey to success as a company was not straightforward. It was chaotic and a mess in and of itself. Steve Jobs invested a tremendous amount of money into that company, and this was something that was rare because no one else was willing to do that. The craziest part, though, was that they were literally hemorrhaging cash for a long time, a few years, where they were trying to figure out how they were supposed to make money. They tried all sorts of different stuff, selling technology, and then they eventually, moved into feature films. It wasn't like this immediate journey. And they were literally losing tons and tons of money every single year. And Steve Jobs considered many times selling the company, but he ended up never selling because, he realized that there's still some worth. And when he tried to sell, he realized that people were paying for it. They were willing to, shell out or $20 million for it. And he thought it was worth more. So he kept it, and he used that as a reference to kind of show that people were willing to pay for this. So there has to have still been some value in that company. So I found that very interesting, and it was also interesting because Microsoft was one of the companies that was offering to buy out Pixar. This was in one of the earlier stages of the company. Finally, the number one thing I learned from reading Creativity Inc. And before I get to that, again, I encourage you to read the book. I don't believe in summaries, so this is mainly just to show you the use of the book and see if it's of use to you specifically. Number one, the biggest thing that I learned, and again, this will probably change over time, and there's a lot of stuff that you can really learn from this book. But the number one thing, I guess, would just be how this author really was engrossed in Pixar, and he treated the whole thing, and you can just tell by how he writes about it and talks about his company and the perspective and how he views things. It's analytical, but also very, uh, very smooth, and it is just incredible. He has devoted a lot of time to this company. He's very humble. He knows that he's not perfect, and he's also very grateful because he knew, like, if it wasn't for a bunch of random stuff, this wouldn't have come together. And also, it's just the way that he uniquely views things. It just reminds me that this is the number one book, um, in terms of animation and you know story creation. And if you want to get into that industry, this is absolutely the book you have to read. And it just goes so much into detail, and it is such a unique perspective on business, and it's because of the exact industry and the exact type of service that they provide. And a lot of the stuff that he mentions is specific to the unique type of business that he's a part of, to the weird, long, large, creative campuses, to the way that they organize their meeting tables and chairs, to how they interact and how he, assesses how people interact, and how he structures and plans and works to create a feature film. It's incredible, and the story is just amazing. And this is very specific to what he does. And he has all these mindsets and perspectives and opinions on how it can be done best. And I trust him because he has a lot of experience to back it up. And it's just very innovative, and it reminds me of Google in a lot of ways, because he says things like, just because we are successful in this way doesn't mean that this is the best way of doing things. You always have to keep an open mind and see what else is out there. Things like that. It's just incredible. So you should check this book out. I'll leave all the information in the description of this video if I can remember. And I thank you so much for staying tuned for this whole thing. I'll see you later. Peace.